Hello, everybody. This is Peter Palmiotti of Human Studios, and this is Independent Crossroads. And let me go to the video really quick so don't get busted. With me today is Dean. Do you prefer Dean or Dino?
Dean. I signed Dino. It just makes it easier than signing Dean Haspiel in some kind of cursive, and I never figured out a cool way of writing all that. So my dad used to nickname me Dino. So I realized one day, well, I'm doing this a lot. Why don't I sign it Dino? It's easier, you know? So
Very cool.
but Dean. You can call me Dean.
Dean.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a cool name.
Thank you, Peter.
I don't know what's happening with my. Oh, okay. I don't know what's happening. Yeah, hopefully we're live and all is working. The video didn't start up, but it might be a little delayed. So yeah, welcome to my show. And it's been a
Thanks
crazy
for
day.
having me. Thanks for having me, Peter.
My pleasure. For those that don't know you, and I'm so glad you're here on my channel because there's like many circles I run in, and I think you're on the fringe of a lot of them. So I don't think a lot of my friends are aware of you and your work.
Right.
So I'm glad to bring you to them and vice versa.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you're a Will Eisner Award winner or a Ringo?
No,
Award?
I mean, I've won a couple of awards, which is great. You know, it's a nice acknowledgement. Obviously, that's not why we do this, but you know, I was nominated for a couple Eisners I didn't win. I believe I was nominated for a Harvey that I didn't win, but I did get my first industry award via the Ringos, and so that was really cool, and I was excited by that. And then I also won an award, an Emmy award, for the work I did on HBO's Bored to Death TV show. It was for the work for the opening credit sequence. I helped design a lot of the characters that they used for the animation, and also it was created and written by my good friend Jonathan Ames. Bored to Death, and he loosely based one of the characters played by Zach Galifianakis on me, a cartoonist. So I provided all the comics work in the show for the 3 seasons as well, which was a lot of
fun. I watched some of that. Now I was well aware that you had a hand in that. So yeah, that's awesome.
It's a great show. I love that. I miss that show. It should have gone many more seasons.
Yeah, well, TV, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, well, before we dive into the past, what are you working on currently to let people know what they can go look for and find? I'll put all links down below afterwards. Yeah.
Well, currently I'm working on the 3rd season of The Red Hook, which is called Starcross, and it's in your phone right now for free. And it's all you have to do is download an app from LINE Webtoon or just Webtoon, where you can get like thousands of free comics. And for about 3 years, I've been working on this series, starting with The Red Hook. Then the 2nd season was called War Cry, and the 3rd season is called Starcross, which I believe there's like 12 episodes up right now. The 13th episode either goes up tonight or tomorrow. And each season is 26 chapters. But they yield about 130 pages worth of like traditional comic book, you know, books, graphic novels. And Image Comics published the 1st volume, season 1, The Red Hook, New Brooklyn, and that came out last year. And I believe the 2nd volume will be coming out October 9th of this year, that I hope to debut at New York Comic Con and then take it to Baltimore Comic Con and that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm currently working on. Is basically a free weekly webcomic that's in your phone right now, called The Red Hook, and season 3 is Star-Crossed, but you can catch up on it for free on your phone. And what else am I working on? I'm always juggling and spinning plates, and I've gotten into playwriting lately. I had a couple of plays produced, which was a lot of fun. And recently, I wrote the first drafts of 2 new plays, and I'm hoping to have one produced again in the fall. We'll see what happens. Fingers crossed. So that's something else that I need to do a reading of with the director and producers and some actors and see how that works out. And yeah, I think that's what I'm working on basically right now. And then, as a freelancer, it's like playing pool. You're not playing for the shot in front of you. You're playing for the next shot over, because you have to always be hustling and looking for new work and generating new ideas. And because I'm not kind of a fan favorite or the kind of guy that would get a gig drawing, a few years worth of Batman or Spider-Man, because I kind of have this alternative, gritty, Silver Age style, more akin to what I believe today would be like a YA book, YA graphic novel. I use a lot of flat colors with a tone. And again, I'm inspired by Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and Will Eisner and C.C. Beck and Alex Toth and those guys. Ramona Fraden, I love a lot. So that's more where my style fits. And there's a lot of room for that in the current Marvel and DC comics. But I'm carving my own path, just as you've had to do, Peter. I'm sure.
Yeah.
What are you working on these days?
Well, I did a Kickstarter for the first comic I'm going to be self-publishing called Retro. And
right.
Retro is inspired by comics I read from the 60s to the 90s, with a little bit of modern sensibility. So I'm writing that. For the first issue, I had a friend of mine pencil it, and I'm inking that. So I got the funding back, and I'm going to inks on that, and just working out what the whole issue will have, all the extras and whatnot. And I'm sort of like in the process of working with 3 other artists on 3 other books that will be following that, and another artist for a graphic novel. And yeah, I mean, I'm in the midst of creating my own work, and I probably have more than a year's worth of work ahead of me.
So retro is something you've written and drawn?
I plotted it, so it's not fully scripted, but I
Okay.
pretty much know what I'm going to write when the time comes.
But it's all yours.
Yes, it's all mine. It's a character I originally came up with when I was a teenager, and just developed him over the years. And the pencils were done like 2009, 2010, something like that. It's just like, juggling client work and other books I'm making, and just trying to figure out my way in this industry. I'm finally in a spot where I've wanted to be for years and years. And, I'm working with so many people now and got my hands in so many other projects. It's just, I'm just totally happy every day and just busting my ass.
It's good to be busy. It's good to be busy.
It's good to be busy. Yeah.
So I know you mostly for being an inker. And when you mention these other artists, you mean pencilers that you're inking?
Yeah. The object to my publishing company is going to be, I want to work with a bunch of different artists, and I'm going to ink every one of them.
Right.
So yeah, I'll be writing all the books, and I'll be inking all the books.
Okay.
And publishing all of them.
So are you building out a universe? This is under one publishing imprint?
Yeah. It will be, a bunch of metahumans, since we can't use superhero.
We can't?
Well, that's what I heard.
I'm using it. They can't take away my superhero. Oh, come on, man. But metahuman is cool sounding, so go for it.
Yeah. So it's the same universe as Retro, but there'll be other characters, and they will follow a team book, and it
Okay.
will sort of be its own contained universe.
Right.
I have ideas that I want to do that will be one shots. I mentioned a graphic novel that will be separate from the meta universe.
Okay.
And it's like I already have people coming to me. Oh, how about self-publishing? Like you publishing my book, and
Hmm.
it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let me, get a handle on my company first.
That's right.
Let's
That's
see
right.
if it works.
You know what's so funny about that? It seems, and I get it. Like it seems that creators don't want to deal with the business of comics, and again, I totally get why. But
Yeah.
it's not that hard to figure it out. I don't think. You know, I would maybe warn or caution against necessarily diving into print because you have to distribute it or mail it or get it out there through conventions and through signings and stuff. So I feel like if you're a new artist, a new cartoonist, use the internet, make web comics, test out the form in that way, because the cost, it's much cheaper to deal with than printing something and again, distributing it. But once you start to have a publishing plan, like what you're talking about, building out a universe, it sounds like you have like your Hulk, your Iron Man, your Captain America, and then they're going to become the Avengers or something, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
roll them out, right? Kind
Yep.
of thing. And you got to see and test the waters. But it is funny the minute like someone decides, oh, I'm a publisher now. So many people like scrounge around and be like, me, I'm next. Publish me. But you can publish yourself, just like what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely like I've dabbled with web comics, and I'll like I had to shelf things many a time, so I'll
Mhm.
get back to them because there's so many stories I want to tell. Um, Whether they have an audience, like it's like I'm putting it online. It doesn't really
Mhm.
matter. It's like I
Mhm.
enjoy the process of creating, of doing everything myself. Because I've been an anchor mostly for most of my career. It's like
Mhm.
um, if you didn't know, since you want to know more about me,
Yeah, man.
I worked. The first big company was Valiant,
Okay.
which was back just after Jim Shooter and Barry Smith left,
Mhm.
and so Bob Layton was in charge. Don Perlin was there, um, and it was a business office, a whole floor opposite FIT
Mhm.
college, um, and School of Fashion Art, whatever it's called. um, but they had pencilers, they had anchors, they had what I was a background anchor. They had colorists, they had the writers, they had the editors, they had production. Everybody was there working.
Did you know a guy named Mike Caballero?
Yeah, not really good, but if you mention my name, he knows me.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No, Mike was one of my studio mates. He's
Oh,
one of
cool.
my great comics pals. So I love
Yeah,
Mike. Yeah. He
yeah.
he would tell stories about Valiant. So yeah.
Yeah, someone can't say right now. But yeah, it was a great time, and it's really stuck with me. Like that whole environment, I just loved it.
Mhm.
From there, I met. I talked with a lot of the pencilers because I was surrounded by pencilers there,
Right.
um, and I really built up a good friendship with Jim Calfury, which led to my next serious gig, which was what most people know me for was my work on Aquaman. When he was a penciler and Peter David was writing it,
Right. Right.
um, I did something like 24 issues, give or
Wow.
take.
Wow.
So it wasn't 24 in a row. We were like the fill-in team.
Sure.
Then we came on, but I got a 1-year contract that while I was doing that. Then I went on to Marvel and did a lot of mishmash, just
Mhm.
like a ton of X-Men work, but it was like 3 pages here, 2 pages
Right.
there.
Right.
Worked on a vast array of artists, but it was like almost like I couldn't really tell anybody anything because I didn't get credit in the book.
Oh.
It was just like everything was deadline. Like we needed this tomorrow, we needed this the next day, we need you to work in the bullpen to get this done right now.
I've always wondered, like as a kid reading comics, going to the newsstand, you don't know how these things are produced. They just
Yeah,
appear, and you fall in love with them, and they come out on a regular basis. But
yeah,
then when you find out that they are monthly and it feels like you're only allowed 4 weeks to do everything, which is not how it works. But
no,
it's pretty close to it sometimes. And then you start wondering, well, how did one person draw this comic and one person ink it? And then you find out later, no, usually there were other people helping out. And like you
yeah,
said, didn't always get credit. But having worked on so many artists, and I know you're working with new artists for your company,
right.
who do you feel was your favorite artist that you inked or favorite penciler?
Um, that's a tough one. I mean, I I would almost have to say by default Cal Fury because I really worked on
You worked with
with
him a
him.
lot. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I worked with him the most. Um, and there was so many great artists I worked with, but it was like, really don't call it working if it's only 2 or 3 pages. It was almost like I just got a taste before I had to move on to something else. Um, it was around the whole, mid '90s, so it was 10 or 15 X-Men titles. Uncanny X-Men. I worked on Gambit and Cable and almost anything that was out at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I would just have to say Cal Fury by default.
And I
But
mean that makes sense. And
yeah,
and like, do you remember taking on a job? You know the word embellisher? Sometimes you
yeah,
see it would say like layouts or pencil and embellisher. And it always seemed different from inker. Like what does that mean? And then you start to get the feeling that the inker did more work than the penciler put in. Like maybe they just laid it out and then the inker would come in and do a lot of the extra work. Did you ever have any pages like that?
yeah.
Uh,
Totally. I almost feel like embellisher is a better word for inker. Um, but essentially they mean the same thing. Like um, finisher is where you get just breakdowns and you have to
right,
really go in and do the art and
right,
then like finish inking it. Um, but yeah, it's like Cal Fury is super super tight. So he's the extreme. The most I'm doing to his work is like minor line weight differences here and there that
right,
really
right,
that make a world of difference. And it took me a long time to learn that. But
right. Who were your teachers?
um, everybody. I mean, it's like I worked with my brother a lot. It was because of um, helping out Mark Texiera.
Mark.
Um,
I love Mark.
back in the day, back in the '90s, when he was working on Ghostwriter,
Uh-huh.
he had a deadline. It was like the book was due the next day, and he had like 15 pages. So it was me, Mark, Jimmy, Ken Branch, and maybe one other guy
Right,
up up in the Marvel offices
right,
after 5 o'clock. Nobody else was there,
right,
and just like swapping pages back and forth. Mark was high on coffee and donuts. Um, and we were just slapping out. I was filling in blacks. Jimmy was inking backgrounds.
right.
Ken was helping out, and Mark was just sort of drawing figures in ink and just like
Sure.
we just had to get it done. It was due
Yeah,
first thing in the morning.
yeah.
Um, and I decided right there and then I wanted to make comics my career. It's like
Wow.
it, yeah, it's like just the experience of it and being in the office for the first time. Reading about reading Stanley's column for years and dreaming about what's the bullpen look like. To finally be up there and it's like I always had a love of comics. I always drew. Same thing with my brother, and it's like at one point we had both big collections going where we buying new issues of everything, and so I had certain titles, and he had other certain titles. So together we had,
Yeah.
we were reading a lot of books. Um, and yeah, it's just like, my father used to take us to comic conventions and really pushed the hobby onto us.
Was he a
um,
reader? Your father a reader as well? He liked comic books. Your dad?
he read newspapers. I mean, that's about his free time. He read newspapers. He might have read novels at some point,
Hmm. Hmm.
but more, not fiction, nonfiction.
Right.
Um, and he was from World War II era. Um, and he
Mm.
he had a paint store in Manhattan, Upper West Side.
Where in the
That
Upper West Side?
what is it, like 82nd, 83rd Street, something like that, on 6th Avenue,
Uh,
Avenue, Avenue of the Americas.
oh, Avenue America. So yeah. So I grew up at 79th Street and Broadway of the
Okay,
Upper West Side.
not too
That
far away, walking
yeah,
distance.
yeah. That's funny. Wow. I might even walk by that paint store a lot.
Yeah,
I had no idea. That's interesting. Huh.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. It was one of those places where you walked in, it was really like, you know slim, but
Hmm.
the ceilings were like 20 feet tall or something.
I must have been in that place. Uh, I You're talking about the being in the bullpen. Uh, I
Yeah.
I worked in the bullpen for about a year in 1995, every Wednesday, and
Yep.
so I got a taste of the bullpen. It was a very interesting space. But when you were in the bullpen, it was also in the 90s or the 80s.
It was in the 90s. It was in the 90s.
Oh, okay,
Because I started my career in 91.
okay.
Um, so it must have been 94, 95. I'm not sure exactly.
So we may have crossed paths
But
then too.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Uh, um,
Do you remember
but I
Mort?
was,
Do you remember Mort Todd and Carl
um,
Bowlers?
yeah, but I don't think I ever met him, but I know
Okay.
the name. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with those guys, and they were a lot of fun.
um,
Lisa Hawkins was there, I remember, and some other
okay.
folks. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Who am I trying to think of? Greg was his real name. He went by
Oh,
Pon-
Pun
Ponscom.
Ponscom. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he was.
Yeah.
I think he was the last guy in the bullpen before they made changes or something.
Yeah, yeah. The last survivor.
Yeah, moved over to
Um,
their new digs. Yeah. Did you ever? Did
and
you ever? Did you ever meet Stan Lee?
I've seen him plenty at conventions, but I never actually went up to him and said hello.
Come on.
Yeah, I know. I'm lame that way, but he was too much of a superstar. Um, it's like he's in my heart.
Yeah. No. Of
I
course. Of course.
I don't think meeting him would have damaged my vision of him, but um, it was just I saw him. I saw him enough,
Yeah.
and I saw how crazy it got around him at conventions, and just didn't want to add to it.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
He
That's
was an
fair.
older man.
Well,
Um,
who in comics did you meet that was like a hero to you that you did get to shake their hand and say thank you or something like that? Like, who's your favorite?
um, well, I mean, going in as an anchor, and it's like I had the same thought as my brother. um and it was almost like I wasn't following his footsteps. It was like, oh, I know that's my way in the door. So one of my biggest influences was Bernie Wrightson, hands
Oh my God.
hands down.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I did meet him, but
You did.
unfortunately he must have been just a lot of things on his mind, because he was looking over me. But but
That's
you know
cool.
s- yeah, I was happy to see him. It's like, with some people I want to go up and talk to, with some other
Mhm.
people I just want to see.
Right.
It's like I
Right.
saw Jim Stalin. I mean, big, huge Jim Stalin fan.
Hmm.
um, but I didn't have to go say hello. I just saw him. That was enough.
Hmm.
Much like Stanley, it's
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
um, I was a big fan of Strangers in Paradise.
Oh, yeah, yeah. He's
So,
great.
you
Yeah.
know, I met him.
Right.
You know, so many creators. Colleen Duran,
Mm-hmm.
I met
Mm-hmm.
her a number of times.
Mm-hmm.
She's always very sweet. Um,
So a good mix between Marvel, DC, and independent creators. You like them
yeah,
all, you know. All right, that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. Because I mean, I mostly had Marvel comics growing up, but I
Mm-hmm.
did read a lot of DC,
Mm-hmm.
and I did collect a lot of independent comics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ElfQuest, like Wendy Penny,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, like Nexus, Steve Rude.
Oh,
You
that's
know,
amazing. That stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, I love
yeah,
that.
yeah,
All right, cool, cool.
yeah. Um, but yeah, you know, it's like I I I did my Marvel thing, I did my DC thing, I worked for Valiant, which was awesome. Um, but like since 2000, between 2000 and now, um, I've been working on a lot of independent comics and for small independent publishers.
Mm-hmm.
And some things were great, and a lot of things, you know, like some things didn't pan out, or some things didn't
Mm-hmm.
really sell. Um, and I've been getting that itch to, you know, it's like when I was up in Maryland, DC, I was getting that itch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though I'm on a popular book and it's ongoing and it's a regular gig and I'm working 24/7, there's something else missing. I have to, you know, it took me so long to figure it out. It's like, I just want to create my own stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I'm in the same kind of space right now. I'm in a nice autonomous space because for many years, like my dream when I was 12 years old was to pencil the Fantastic Four. And that's not going to happen. I did, in fact, technically pencil a bunch of pages of the Fantastic Four. So I have drawn FF Canon, which is awesome. And I'm honored to have done that. And I have FF stories I'd like to do, but that's not going to happen really, And I've done Spider-Man. I've again worked for DC and Marvel. If you look me up, you'll find some stuff here and there, but nothing too substantial. I found that I made more of an impact through the indie arena. Uh, in fact, memoirs, working with Harvey Pekar and American Splendor, and then it was my introduction to the producer that made American Splendor the movie happen. In fact, that's the other thing I forgot to talk about.
mm,
I've been doing a weekly podcast with Josh Neufeld called Scene by Scene with Josh and Dean, which breaks down American Splendor the movie scene by scene. And we also talk about our relationship with the late, great Harvey Pekar. And to me, more importantly, I get to discuss my friendship with Josh Neufeld, growing up with him and learning to make comics. So it's kind of like an historical audio document about that time. But right now, uh, and it's at scenebyscene.com, I believe. Or is it scenebyscenepodcast.com? Anyway, you look up our names and the podcast, you'll find it. But right now, I'm in this really cool autonomous space where I'm getting paid a living wage to live in New York City, the most expensive place on planet Earth, to write and draw a comic series that I create and own, which is how many people can say that? You know, sure,
yeah,
it's not. It may not be Hellboy or or Sin City or a handful of other creator-owned comics that blew up. But right now I get to enjoy that space, and then who knows what the future holds. Again, I'm hustling, trying to come up with ideas for other gigs, but I'd rather stay in this space of writing and drawing my own comics. So if I can make that dent, not necessarily in the weekly Wednesday comic world, because that's a whole different realm, these days. But
yeah,
to be coming out, right now with an annual affair via Image Comics, but then try to figure out, do I try to do a monthly comic, or do I come out with like two albums a year, kind of like the French albums, the European
yep,
64
hardcover,
page, kind of a
yeah,
hardcover 64 page type thing. Um, and then the funding of that, like how do I make a living at that? Will the sales yield enough to give me a back end kind of payment or royalty to be able to do more. That I'm not so sure yet. But I love storytelling. I love doing the podcast. I love making comics. I love writing plays. I'm going to be going away in September on a writers retreat at Yaddo, this really cool artist writers colony, which grants you the privilege to be able to, live in a mansion on 400 acres of land, and they don't bother you. They feed you and they encourage you to basically do what you want. And the last few times I've been there, I've gotten a lot of writing done. And for a guy that grew up wanting to draw comics, writing came to me later. But I realized that because I was drawing comics, you're writing because image is text in comics, So you're constantly drawing for the next panel, earning that next stage in the story. So you're writing. Even when you're working with a writer, you're also flexing your own muscles as an artist to visually stage a story. So little by small, I realized, wait a second, I actually am kind of writing. So I encouraged myself to, massage that and practice it and test the waters and actually start typing and seeing the typing turn into writing, and that kind of stuff. So that's so right now I'm, as I said, in an autonomous space, and I would love to stay in it, obviously, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough. I mean, to put out properties and to make consistent money, and I'm throwing a lot of things out at the wall, and I think I will succeed in the level where it's like I can survive, but I'm in like the cheapest place of the world as opposed to you, who's in the most
Right.
expensive.
Right.
Um, but and Yondu sounds freaking awesome.
But you know what? Real quick,
Yeah,
what's also important, because you're taking the extra risk of publishing, right?
yeah,
So I get frustrated with certain publishers because I sometimes, and I've criticized some publishers in the past by saying, oh, they're just synonymous with paying the printer's bill, meaning you hand over the work, you do all this beautiful stuff, you hope for the best, and then all they do is print it and then ship it out and hope that it sells. But I'm
yeah,
like, but what about the marketing? And I feel like a lot of publishers rely on your own ability to brand yourself and to, be on Twitter all day long or something, or Facebook and Instagram and all the social networking tools we have. But I should be spending more time creating if I'm supposed to be writing and drawing, right? So as much as I personally like to, talk with people and talk to anybody, what we're doing right now, I share a studio with a bunch of other artists. We talk all day long, but I should be creating more than I am pimping and hyping myself. I feel so. As a publisher, I think it's key and important to spend some money and effort and strategize a marketing plan.
yeah,
So as you begin to self-publish and spark this new universe, think about that. Think about the marketing and how are you going to tell people about the stuff that you're publishing and making, you know?
yeah. Well, I've already come up with a master plan um, that is pretty insane, and perhaps I'll be able to execute by early next year. Um, and it's based off the past couple of months of what I've been going through. And yeah, I mean, it's like I came up with a superhero team, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of ditched those characters, but still clung to the idea of a team, and um, took a couple of them and now making some new ones. And so going forward, it's kind of that same concept, like you were saying. Like, yeah, it's everybody wants to do their own Avengers team or do their own X-Men team or whatever.
Well, if they're
Um,
making superhero comics, that's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
because there's all kinds of comics, as you know.
Yeah, but it's funny because now as I dig deeper into it, um, I'm looking around at what a lot of my fellow peers, indie guys, are doing, and they're doing exactly that. They're doing their own version of that. And yeah, what makes me stand unique above them, or out from them? Um, yeah, I got some things in the works.
Okay.
At the very least, I'll be putting out some good books, hopefully.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. I mean, I think the hardest thing right now to do in comics is to dare to compete with a Marvel or DC because they have been doing superhero comics for almost 100 years combined, and also Archie comics actually as well. They started doing superhero comics in the 1940s,
Yeah,
but and they're having a tough time competing with Marvel and DC, and I know because I did 10 issues of the Fox with them, 2 miniseries, and we're hoping to do more, but we'll see what happens. But
yeah,
and then I dared to like come up with New Brooklyn Universe with the late Seth Kushner, who co-created the Brooklynite, and then there's Vito Del Sante and Ricardo Venancio, who the three of us co-created the Purple Heart, which is a character in this New Brooklyn universe. And then I'm doing my Red Hook stuff. But at the end of the day, it's still a superhero comic book in a superhero universe. And then
yeah,
I know like Lion Forge came out with, they rolled out a whole bunch of superheroes. Now Humanoids is rolling out superheroes. And yet I've talked to other publishers that kind of are allergic to superheroes because they don't want to deal with the big, the big two, Marvel and DC. And I don't blame them either because, I think they're having a tough time selling their comic books, even though Marvel blew up the cinematic, realm,
yeah,
and took
yeah,
over Hollywood, which is amazing. And I know DC is having more of a struggle with that, it seems. But
yeah,
yeah, but to have that kind of legacy and that history of producing those kinds of comics, it is a tough time to dare to compete with that in that genre, which is why I think maybe it might be smarter to do like more memoir oriented stuff or YA young adult kids type material. I mean, the good news is that kids are reading comics. Like you have to go to a bookstore probably instead of a comic book shop, although comic book shops do carry YA books. But the good news is like people like Raina Telgemeier, with Smile or Guts,
yeah.
or like George O'Connor with his Olympian series, or I mentioned Mike Cavallero earlier. He just came out with Nico Bravo, a new book series from First Second. He also did a great collaboration with J.M. DeMatteis called Impossible Incorporated. Again, young adult stuff. It's really great stuff. So one of the plates I'm spinning is trying to come up with a YA book as well, and we'll see what happens.
Oh, cool. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, it's like the bottom line is I'm sort of interested in doing everything. It's just what I have time for right now. Um,
Peter,
you
we're
know.
getting old. We're getting old, Peter. You got to pick and choose.
Oh. Uh. Well, as I told my ex all the time, I'm going to live to 120. So,
Oh,
in,
wow.
in about 3 years, I'll be hitting my midlife crisis.
That's
Um,
fantastic. And you get to have a few midlife crises if you're going to be 120,
Yeah, really.
right?
um, I guess we should check the chat to see if anybody's chatting away.
I can't look
Maybe,
at that. So,
yeah. Oh, we just got a few people.
hi,
Says
everybody.
awesome. Yeah, we got Ronnie, we got Tim, we got Larry, some other people who haven't commented, but Ronnie says awesome playwright. I'll be looking forward to that. Besides reading your comic,
Oh, thank you.
um, mostly it's people saying hi to each other. Um, so that's what's happening in the chat. Um,
So
but
no,
yeah,
no,
it's
no
like
questions. No questions in the
no,
chat.
no
Somebody can ask
question
a
yet.
question, right?
Somebody can
Okay.
ask a question.
All right.
Um, yeah, like you mentioned, being a playwright. I've dabbled. I worked with a friend of mine who was an actor in plays, and he needed a hand at some point. So I did some audio stuff and some light stuff.
Hmm.
on some off-Broadway shows. So I was happy to be a part of the process and happy to see the actors working out their roles and, like, expanding upon the script, changing the
Hmm.
script,
Hmm.
doing it day after day, being there, and before it, we start, and getting the butterflies, and
Hmm.
just, it's like I'm going to screw up my part, and that's going to screw up the whole play.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's such an experience. And actors are a trip,
Right.
to be around. I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, I kind of, because I've worked with directors that take over the script and insert their vision on, on top of what I've written. And I usually am pretty hands off. Sometimes I might have a little note here or there, but I've worked with two great directors, Ian W. Hill, who directed two of my plays, and Philip Cruz, who directed one of my plays, who may be directing another play. And the other cool thing is that both of those directors are also actors as well as directors and producers. So they, like us as cartoonists, like you and me, Peter, who can do everything, right? Like write, draw, color, letter, all that
Yeah,
stuff. It's cool to be around, to work with, and collaborate with people that also can basically do the whole thing themselves as well. And then you bring other people in, and it's an amazing experience to see the process of all of that, and then to be able to step back. And because I'm so used to being such a control freak on my own personal works, like the Red Hook or other comics I've done on my own, I have to like put on a different hat that allows me to step back and say, well, I handed you the baton. Here's the story. Here's the script the way I wrote it, and now make it work and see if this can happen. And of course, you try to do your best, and then you put it on stage, and then when you're in front of an audience, a whole other thing happens. Like
yeah,
you get the immediate responses, or what's working, what's not working, and it changes night to night. So
yeah.
what might have worked last night doesn't work tonight, and vice versa. So, and then also I try to work for the virtues of the medium, meaning with comic books, it's static images. It's going from one panel to the next, changing the real estate of the page to honor, and exploit the narrative visually in a certain way. With theater, it's basically you have like a bunch of people just standing on stage. There's no close-ups. And it all has to do with lighting and where are people standing and how do they behave toward each other and the timing of all that. And it becomes this intimate experience. Often, my plays are done in what's called like a black box theater. Like not more than 100 seats. And
Right.
and you can almost like exhale and inhale together. That's like the moment you're waiting for, is to be able to have everybody in sync, and hopefully, love these characters and follow the story. And of course, with film, you can do close-ups, and it involves all kinds of sound editing and moving pictures and how a camera might, follow something and all that stuff. And then novel writing, prose writing is kind of engaging the reader to become the co-author, because you can describe something, but the way the person interprets that description is the value they add to the story. So it's trying to be aware of all the different mediums and how to write, or perform for those different mediums. Like, what do I need to do in order to make that work at its best? And I do think about that. And I juggle that a lot. So these days, when I write a story like a play, well, maybe not comics. Some comics could not be a play, but definitely a lot of my plays, I think, could be comics, or could be an independent film, or maybe a pilot to a TV show or something like that. But also, I'm respecting the limitations of what, just two people standing on a stage, what they can do, so that it doesn't feel limited at all. It just feels above and beyond, or that's what
Yeah.
you're hoping for. So what looks like a limitation can actually be fruitful, and you just shoot for the stars, at that point. Have
Yeah.
you ever written a play, or besides being involved in them?
No, but it's something I could do. if if it came to me. Um, it's like I've seen plays, other than what my friend was in. I've seen some New
Right.
York plays here and there. I would say the most powerful thing I saw was Sandra Bernhard, her one woman show years
Mm.
and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was a small space. That was maybe 100 people there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was just like she was acting on stage, and she walked up and down the aisle,
Mm.
and it was just like really, really well executed, and she's just an awesome talent, and it was just powerful
Mm-hmm.
and moving and touching and all that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
how you can create that um, in an hour and a half or however long it was, um, is amazing, and to do it every night, and
Well, Sandra Bernhard, right? So
yeah,
for those people listening that may not remember who she is, or they're probably
yeah,
Googling her or something, uh, she was a comedian
yeah,
who was in Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy, correct? Right?
yeah,
With
yep.
Robert De Niro and Jerry Lewis. And she plays like this psychotic superfan. And she was great in it, but she was also terrifying in it. And I have an interesting little bit of trivia, which is my godmother, Shelley Winters, the actress Shelley Winters, who's no longer with us, but she's my
Ah,
godmother. She's the person who introduced my parents to each other, and I'm
aw,
on planet Earth because of Shelley Winters. She was up for that role, the Sandra Bernhard role in the King Comedy, and she turned it down. So I thought that was an interesting
wow.
little bit of business right there. You know?
Yeah, wow. Did you know De Niro's in the Joker movie that's coming out later
Yep,
this year?
yep. I
Yeah,
saw him.
it's
Yep,
that's sort of a flip of his character.
yep,
Um,
yep. I wonder if it's an extension. If he was doing, I mean, I'm curious to know what he's going to play in the movie, the Joker movie.
it's
You know?
just he's a talk show host or something, or he
Okay,
introduces
okay,
him, as the Joker. I don't know, something. We'll see, I guess.
right, right,
But
okay.
uh, yeah, I mean, I guess what I wanted to turn to was how comics used to be such a certain thing back in the day. Like there was a
Mm-hmm,
writer, there was a penciler, there was an inker, there was a colorist. Now it's a lot of people. Writers are penciling and pencilers are writing, and everything's going nuts. And there's some good that comes out of that. There's some chaos that comes out of that. But I think to a certain extent, like you were sort of alluding to, is like, we're all writers to a certain extent.
mm-hmm,
We all envision something before it's finished on the page,
mm-hmm.
and we're all part of that creative process. It is more of a machine if you're working for Marvel DC. We have experienced that.
Well, you're
Um,
talking about the assembly line, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
parse out the different bits of labor to get it out
yep,
the door in a certain amount of time. But
yep,
things have changed. I mean, I don't even. I mean, there's a lot of like very popular pencilers these days that can only produce about 6 issues of comics a year. You know, no longer do we have the Kurt
yeah,
Swan, Jim Aparo, Jack Kirby, John Byrne, and George Perez with his level of detail is incredible.
yeah,
But
yeah,
like we don't have that kind of any anymore. I mean, maybe what was it? Snyder and Capullo who did Batman. They were able to basically crank out a monthly book.
yeah,
Again with the help of inkers and colorists and letters and editors and everybody else. Um, but times are changing. So in fact, when you were telling me earlier that you have all these pencilers that you're inking, I was thinking, I don't know many inkers anymore because that part of the job has changed a lot. Because a lot of people who are penciling are able to pencil in a certain tight way, tweak it, scan it, and then turn it into like an inked image or a hard line image, right? That can be
right,
colored over. And I've been noticing that. Now, what you do is different. You're adding a certain kind of value and thin and thick and let it undulate or whatever, and that's what I do when I ink. In fact, I try to get like a dry brush effect on certain parts of my artwork. And it just depends on the job, but I feel like the inker has been going the way of the dodo bird in certain ways these days, because of our technology. I mean, when you think about why was there inking in the first place, is because you couldn't reproduce pencils, and even no matter how tight you penciled, the camera work, the way they produced, comics and print back in the day, you couldn't really get that, So they had people go over the lines and thicken it up and be able to turn them into plates that would then run off, ink on print and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But that's now changed, as we've talked. I mean, I've actually produced comics only in pencil. A lot of my Fox series was a very tight pencil line art that I've been filling the blacks on Photoshop and that kind of stuff, and do little tweaks here and there.
Right.
But it is really cool to know that you've figured out a way to employ yourself through your own imprint, where you're writing, inking. Are you designing the characters too?
Some myself, some with the artists.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that you're rolling out a bunch of books that keeps you
Yeah.
busy doing the comics the way you like to make them.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I have a certain, comic visually that I like seeing, and
Mhm.
that's one that's inked. That's one that has a pencil or an inker.
Mhm.
That's what I prefer seeing most of the time. There's always exceptions to the rule, and I did grow up on like Heavy Metal magazine, so that's like a wide array
Oh
of
yeah. Oh yeah.
different visual, things to burn your eyeballs.
What you had Liberatore, is that his name? He
Yeah,
did Ranks of Rocks. You had
yeah,
Corbin, you had Mobius, you had all these different artists doing like incredible, illustrative and or innovative solutions to create comics, show
yeah.
comics, and very influential, absolutely.
Yeah, amazing, amazing, amazing stories. Like especially the early heavy metal.
Hmm.
I saw you credited like you did something for heavy metal. What was that?
So I've contributed to the in the last few years. They reprinted a couple of my stories. I do a character called Billy Dogma, and there
Right.
were a couple, I believe, a couple of Billy Dogma stories that were reprinted in there. I also collaborated with Stoya. Do you know who Stoya is?
I don't think so. I
Uh,
heard,
in,
I saw you wrote her name out.
yeah, she's basically an international porn star, but she also writes and creates essays and writes columns. And she starred in a movie called AI Rising or Ederlezi Rising, which she won awards for. She's also been in two of my plays. So the way I met her was through Jeff Krelitz, the publisher of Heavy Metal, who I'm friends with, and he thought it would be a good idea for us to get together and collaborate for the sex issue like 2 years
Mhm.
ago or a few years ago. And I met up with her and we took one of her blog posts, one of her essays, and I converted it into a 4-page heavy metal comic, and we've been collaborating on other stuff ever since. So
Cool.
that was something. And then a friend of mine, we reprinted a story with my friend writer Tim Hall, and I feel like there was maybe one. Oh, I did a comic called Frankenstein Unrequited. That's basically a 10-page mute silent story that involves the Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's monster, as well as like the werewolf, the mummy, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and who else? And spoiler, the Invisible Man shows up. Uh, so I did a really cool story that actually then I developed into a longer story that I'm trying to pitch as well as a graphic novel. So I've done a bunch of things at heavy metal, and it's an honor. It's like it's bucket list type thing, like you want to get into
Yeah.
heavy metal. So hopefully I'll be in it again. How about you?
Awesome.
Did you get into heavy metal? Did you ever do anything?
Um, I never pitched them anything. it's like heavy metal has been through its phases, and for a
Mhm.
time it was like lacking the good stuff. I haven't looked at it lately.
It's good.
Actually, like, and it's good now. It's
Yeah, it's
back to
good.
being, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't
I
have
got
the old stuff because the old stuff is the old stuff. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. No, as long as it has good stories, good art,
it's got it.
that's
It's got it.
I know like um back before I worked in comics, I worked at like just huge companies in Manhattan,
Hmm.
and advertising, textiles, all different kinds. Um, and it was always like millions of magazines around.
Hmm.
And it was like all of the magazines that came out this week, and not even a month. It was like this week, here's like 50, 100 magazines. And, you go to a newsstand now, there's maybe 10. It's so like,
Well, maybe in Kentucky they have newsstands. I haven't seen a newsstand in New York in a
well,
long time.
like the corner of Walmart, whatever.
All right, okay, right, or a 7-Eleven or something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, the magazine industry is print is dying. They keep saying,
Yeah.
and they're not totally wrong, but it is harder to find that stuff. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I mean, it's like it seems with crowdfunding, I mean, which I recently did, and actually as I'm a part of an anthology right now called Werewolves and Unicorns and Other Mythical Creatures. It's myself and 27 other creators each did a 4-page story.
mm,
So it's like a 120 something page book.
mhm.
Um, and that was the first story I wrote, penciled, and inked in my whole career, like start to finish. And
4 pages.
yeah, 4 pages. Because
Wow, congratulations.
I've written stuff. I penciled some stuff. Probably you'll never be able to find, but this is the first one I wrote, penciled, and inked, and I'm very happy with it. And there's some awesome creators in that. Anyway,
Wait,
um,
what mythological character did you write
I
and
I
draw?
I did a griffin, so
Ah,
they joke around. It's Peter's griffin.
there you go. There it is. Well,
um, but yeah, I mean, with crowdfunding, I guess where I was going was, it's like it seems like fans still want printed comics, and that's where they're getting a lot more of them than maybe comic stores or conventions or whatever.
well, I mean, let's push collectability to the side because I think there's a
Yeah,
collector mentality for print, and if it's a rare run, then they want that and put it in plastic and never read it, and then try to resell it later, or all that stuff.
right.
Speculation, right? It's all
Yeah,
speculation. I do like a well crafted comic book. I was talking to I was talking to Josh Neufeld recently, and I had gone to the comic shop. I haven't been to. I shop at JHU Comics in the city, and sometimes I go to Forbidden Planet. Anyway, and I told him how the night before I had just gotten like a whole bag of comics, like 3 months worth of stuff that I get, and I was reminded how much I love just sitting on the couch, cracking open a comic book. Now I have to wear glasses because I can't read the print these days, but just to be able to like sit there, and it's not like a 10-part TV series, it's not a movie or whatever, which I love as well, but there's something about just being able to hold a comic in your hand and peruse the page at your own time, your own pace, and then you get to the end of the issue and hopefully it's a satisfying read. I mean, when I was younger, when we were younger,
yeah,
a 22-page comic told a whole story. Now it takes usually 6 issues to tell that same story, but again, that's fine. It's just more expensive. But then there
yeah.
are like some of the self-published stuff I really enjoy. I know that old pal of mine, Michel Fife, who does Copra, and now I think Image is going to be publishing it come October. He does this thing and he puts it all together. He's at home, writes it all, draws it and everything, and then sends it to the printer, and he then would then mail it to your house, like, or find a few comic shops that would, like, sell it. And that's what often pick up my copies. But there was just something about like that handmade feel almost, like that artisanal quality, that
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily true to like the comics that we picked up at the newsstand because that was more mass produced, right?
Right.
But that was like
Yeah.
but still it was like low budget mass produced because it was newsprint, off register printing, cheap throwaway 25, 35 cent, 40 cent comics, like now they're $4 or $5 to read 1/6 of a story. But anyway, there's still a lot of publishers, and maybe what you'll be doing with your imprint is to have that sense of that artisanal sense of like, this is what I can afford. This is what's going to look like. It's going to come out on, probably cheap paper or affordable paper, and then if you want to craft it and collect it and make a sexy package out of it, fine, but I don't know. I still love that kind of cheap, almost disposable feeling of a comic, even though it's not disposable, but it feels like one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway.
Back when I was collecting, I don't know, like Captain America or Avengers or Spider-Man or whatever,
Hmm.
that was newsprint. That was like, it was a standard and it was inexpensive
Right.
and I thought it was quality. It was like,
Yeah.
it didn't seem cheap to me. It didn't
No, not
seem,
at all. Not at
yeah,
all. And yet I kind of crave that sensibility still.
yeah.
And I dollars to donuts, if you tried to recreate that experience today, it might even be more expensive than what comics cost now to, the way they're made, because you got to get that newsprint feel and, create that off register and get those Ben-Day dots and everything. And I mean, also everyone talks about the smell of newsprint, as it gets
Right.
old, So, but that's our childhood, So.
Yeah. Well, there is a publisher, Alterna Comics.
Hmm.
They publish in newsprint, and
What
I
do you
think
do?
the comics are like a dollar 50,
Oh
something like that.
wow. Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
So that stuff is out there, and you could actually get your comic published through them. Like if you want to get 500 printed up.
Oh, so they have like a deal.
Yeah. Um.
So are they like a printer that
Well,
they have a
well,
deal with a printer or distribution or?
I don't know exact details, but
Okay,
I think it might be their own printing press. I forget,
right,
but they're printing so many comics
right.
that if you want to like sort of tag along and print yours when they're printing
Oh,
theirs,
that makes sense. That makes sense. You get
then
a
you can.
deal. Everyone
Yeah,
gets a deal out of that. Like
yeah,
the more
yeah,
you print, the cheaper it costs. Right. I get
yeah.
it.
They're not
Okay.
going to distribute it for you, but
Okay.
they'll print it for you.
All right.
So
Well, Peter, I have to hop soon because I'm
yeah,
inking. Here's a little sneak peek of something. I'm
there you
inking
go.
page 111 of Starcross. And I'm still in the studio in Gowanus. It's getting a little late here, 10:05. But
Yeah.
was there any other question you want to ask me or talk about, or did anybody weigh in with anything?
I'll check to see if anybody weighed in. I do have one question. Let's
Okay.
see. Oh, now we have a bunch of talk.
Uh-oh.
Oh, we're not going to get to any. Oh my God, it's like so much talking going on. All right.
Is
Um,
it positive talk? Hopefully.
it seems like it. I don't know if they're talking amongst themselves, but okay, it doesn't seem specific to you.
Okay.
Or I did have one question.
Yes.
Like, okay, you started in comics, or maybe at some point later on. I'm not even sure, but you worked with
Mhm.
Howard Chankin, Bill Sienkiewicz, and one other I'm forgetting at the moment.
Walter Simonson.
Walter Simonson with Thor. I mean, you were on some primo stuff.
Yep.
Was that your very like break in?
That was 1985. It was my senior year in high school. I had befriended Larry O'Neill, great pal, great writer, great artist, actually, because he also wanted to do comics and he became a filmmaker and now he's teaching film at SUNY Purchase. And his father is Denny O'Neill. the writer editor, for Marvel and
Right.
DC. And I believe he had heard that, I forget which one. I think it was Howard Chaykin needed an assistant, and I think Larry got the job being an assistant. And then down the hall was Bill Sienkiewicz with a few other artists. Dennis Cowan and Michael Davis were sharing a room down the hall, and Bill decided he needed an assistant or wanted one. So I came in, showed my portfolio, got the job working on New Mutants and the first issue of Elektra Assassin, working with Bill. And then down the hall, I'd also hang out with Howard Chaykin, who was working on American Flag with Larry, Walt Simonson on Thor, and another artist named James Sherman. And that room had also been occupied, I believe, by Frank Miller and Jim Starlin and possibly one other person. I can't remember.
Oh my goodness.
And it was like 1985, senior year of high school, 17 going on 18, wanting to be a comic book artist since I was 12. One of the first comic books I ever picked up was Star Wars, as illustrated by Howard Chaykin. And little did I know that 9 years later, I'd be, eventually I too would become a second assistant to Howard and also help out Walter. And it was an incredible time, like Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 at least, like 3 to 4 hours a day. I'd be working on these amazing comic books, with these incredible artists and story makers, who are very forgiving of my talent and skill set, but also very encouraging. And I still know these guys to this day. They're my heroes, my mentors. And what can I say? It was a heady time. And I didn't get a lot of my homework done in senior year, but I did pass. I did graduate high school. So
That's outstanding. You mentioned James Sherman. He's a personal favorite.
oh
He's the
yeah,
guy. He did Legion of Superheroes at some
he did
point.
Legion of Superheroes, and I believe he did a epic comic called Star Grip Starkey or something like that, or something Grip
Oh,
Starkey.
yeah, it sounds
It
familiar.
was like an epic, from Epic at the time, like an indie kind of creator-owned thing. But yeah, he did Legion, and he dipped his toes in a bunch of different comics.
Yeah, both me and Jimmy were big fans of his work, and it was like he was here and then he was gone. It was like, where'd he go? We loved his
Yeah.
work.
Well,
Yeah.
I believe he made more money doing advertising work, like,
Oh, there you go.
which is the case usually.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But man, thank you so much for coming on. This has been fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and
Yeah.
I'm glad I got to learn more about you, man.
And
And listen, I wish you the greatest success and the greatest luck with your imprint. And I'm
thank
curious to
you.
know, like, how you're going to market this. I don't know if it involves nudity or crime or I don't know what,
Some things you got to do.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
But yeah, so I'll get a bunch of links from you and I'll put them below in the below the video in the description box for people to go click and check them out. Oh, personal favorite was The Quitter, the book that you did.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. Thank you very
yeah,
much.
picked that up, read that, love that. Oh, it's
Thank you.
gorgeous. And yeah, all your stuff is really, really, really good. People should go check it out. Your web comics running live right now. So yeah, thank you again, Dean, for coming on.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you everybody for watching. Please come again.